Today we are painting this beautiful black lab. Thank you for painting along with me. We're gonna have so much fun. All the supplies that we're gonna be using for today's video are in the Paint 333 supply list that you can find at paint333.com. I am painting on a full-size sheet that I cut down to 22 by 28 of Fabriano 300-pound cold press paper. Before I start my paintings, I like to plan them out, and I have this kind of fancy painting planning sheet that you can get in the video description. But if you don't have that, you just need to write down a couple things that might help you as you start painting. I like to plan things in a way that allows me to still make kind of spontaneous decisions, but also gives me that freedom to just go with the flow and have some decisions already mapped out for me, so I don't have to do too much thinking while I'm painting. Onyx is just this beautiful black lab, and black dogs look really good when you do purple or blue in their fur. So what I want to do for the shadow color is a really deep, rich, dark ultramarine blue. And for the highlight color, we're going to do a more watery mix of ultramarine blue. And we're going to see. Sometimes as I go, I decide to maybe add in purple or switch things up a little bit depending on the mood. But in general, this is what I'm hoping for. And then for his eyes, he has this gorgeous brown eyes, and so we're gonna really set off the blue in his fur by giving him these punchy copper eyes. And then I was hoping to really incorporate some color runs and pulling color into the background to give it that contrast of tight and controlled details and loose and abstract other elements. So contrast can apply to color and value, but it can also apply to how tight and how loose your painting is. That's the absolute favorite thing I love about watercolor, is that you can do things with it, those watery techniques that you just cannot achieve with other mediums. I like to start with the eyes. I typically think that eyes and the nose, they both need to be really accurate and look really good, and they often require a lot of layers. So I'll give myself a good shot at getting the whole portrait to look really good by making sure the eyes and the nose are just spot on. We have the tracing and the reference photo for this painting in the description, and you can see that aside from the tracing, I did already kind of go in and refine and make sure that the eyes and the nose look really good and give me some solid outlines to know where my paint is going. I have a nice heavy mix of neutral tint, my black color, and I'm just going to go in and give myself some outlines that I can then fill in with color on the other steps that we'll do on the eyes. Since I'm a right-handed painter, I typically work left to right just so I don't try to smear the right side of the portrait. And when you're giving yourself outlines, try to really consider how thin and thick the areas that you're painting are. Thick outlines look kind of cartoony. So if there's a thinner area of black, make sure you're painting it very thin as well. That's another reason why I like to work big, because I just have more room to give myself so I don't look like these thick, chunky outlines that can look a little odd. But this silver black velvet brush, this is a size 6 round, can come to a really nice fine point, and that's also why I typically use it for eyes. I just really like how it does that. And then I'm painting a little bit in the pupil, but it's very reflective, so I don't need to paint too much in there. I typically paint with a lot of the same size brush so that I have flexibility with the colors, and kind of I keep each brush for a specific color. And that way I'm just not cleaning brushes all the time and wasting all that paint. And often what I'll do is also have a brush like this that I use just for water. for things like softening edges and dropping in water. So I'm just putting some water around some of these outlines that we created to give them a softer look and pull some color into it. A really nice heavy mix of black here to get this beautiful eyebrow he has right here too. And sometimes I just like to do this again to give me kind of a roadmap. And I know that this area is going to be really dark anyway, so I'm not too worried about painting it really dark right away. My favorite thing, if you've watched probably any of my videos, is just dropping in water and allowing the paint to run and mix and blend and do watery things. So it will just dry in such a beautiful way if you give it this freedom to be watery, to be who it really is inside. I just love, this is why I love watercolor. And when you pop in little bits of water, it pushes the pigment to the edges and creates these gorgeous pigment outlines that you can't paint those yourself. You have to let the water do that for you. And it's so pretty when it does. So I'm just going to do the same thing on this eye. And what I like to do is babysit too. So as things are drying, I just keep an eye on them and make sure they're drying in really beautiful ways, in the ways that I want them to. Because once they're fully dry, you're more limited in what you can do at that point. I just brushed off a little bit of the paint there so I could get a finer line. If I have a lot of paint and water on my brush, it's hard to achieve that nice fine line that I'm looking for. And then I'm coming in with my nice wet brush and allowing that paint to spill into the other areas of black in the ways that it wants to. And I also have my favorite brush ever, the grainer brush, and you can manipulate these edges too while they're wet to give it that furry texture. So I just have a dry grainer brush, or sometimes I just wet it down to soften those bristles, blot it, and then I can use it to get those furry edges just by pulling that color, that wet color, into dry areas of paper. I'm just putting down a little bit more paint, and I'm going to go ahead and put in a little bit more water and just let it manipulate that pigment, push it around. I like what's happening over here, so I'm encouraging it to keep doing those cool things just by dropping some more water in. And that looks like a really good first layer for our eyes. Let's do the same thing, creating a nice first layer of outlines for us on the nose. And I'm just getting some more water and letting it run into these other areas of the nose and around the nose even, so that it can make these beautiful watercolory patterns while it's drying. And again, we like to just keep an eye on the eyes and how those things are drying too. I just call that babysitting, just to make sure that we can take advantage of anything else that's happening before it dries completely. Coming in with some more water and letting it touch these areas of paint and move around. Now, depending on the brand of paint you're using too, your neutral tint will likely behave differently than mine. It may even look differently than mine. I know some brands have a more of a purpley undertone than this American Journey brand does, which would look gorgeous for this application, this particular subject of a black lab. A lot of fun things you can do here. Now, while this is still wet, we know that ultramarine is going to be our beautiful highlight and shadow color, and our light side is his left side of the paper, and his shadow side is the right side, but it's kind of coming in a little bit diagonally, so maybe more like this side and this side versus just this side and this side. But I'd like to go in with my ultramarine blue right now and let that go in there right away. So ultramarine blue loves to spread, as you can just see how it did. So I'm really focusing on the shadow side of the nose, but letting it go into the highlight side of the nose too. Putting it in the darkest areas I see on the reference photo, and then we can always pull it into the lighter areas and even wait until it's dry and soften it into the lighter areas as well. This is just cool. I like what's happening here, so I'm pulling it into the snout a little bit too. And sometimes I just touch those wet areas and let it flow into this area I'm painting with water, just to give it some more room to be watercolor. Watercolor loves to be watercolor, and we want it to do that. So while this is kind of being pulled away into this edge, it's also pulling color out of the nose. So that's another thing we're going to keep an eye on. We're going to keep babysitting the nose as it dries. So I'm just putting a little bit more of that neutral tint into the nose on the darkest darks and allowing it to move into the rest of the shape that we painted with water. But this would also look really good to give it some of these furry edges while we're here before it dries. Just pulling it a little bit, tiny bit down into that muzzle area. And we can even do the same thing with this color up here, so that we know, oh hey, this is the snout, and it's fluffy and furry too, and whiskery. The other thing that we could have masked out some whiskers. His whiskers are black, but whiskers have this reflective quality. So sometimes even with black animals, I like to mask them out or create lighter color whiskers. But I think with him, what we're gonna do is we'll try scraping as we go. And I wanna come in with some colored buff titanium at the end and see how that looks, because I think that'll be a little bit less harsh than actual masked whiskers. But you can come in right now and do a couple whiskers too. I really love what's happening on that side, that I'm gonna go ahead and just do a similar thing over here, but less so. Kind of, I don't want it to be quite as dark because this is the lighter side of his muzzle. So you can achieve that by just not painting the whole thing too as much. I'm gonna go ahead and move this kind of up and let it keep going up here. I think I'd also like to extend this down a little bit just to make sure the shape of his nose is accurate. And I'm babysitting the nose too, making sure I have enough paint in there as it's been drying and kind of blending into the rest of his snout. I'm gonna come in with some ultramarine blue. I'm gonna do a little bit more on this side of the nose because it's the dark side. And I'm coming in, and now we're almost getting to that stage of color resist where we put it in and it kind of pushes the existing pigment around. Still a little bit wet for that, where it's mostly just kind of blending, but it's looking very good. I'm gonna put some more blue, just a little bit of blue up here and down here. So I'm just kind of really focusing again where I see the darkest areas in the reference photo. Now I'm gonna pull some of that with my grainer brush to make sure we get those edges as they dry. Blotting that off, getting a cleaner brush, and then sometimes I pick up the existing color on the page and pull it around too. How fun is that? Just painting with a color that's already there. Getting those furry edges both in the wet areas and in pulling it into the dry areas. Some of these edges are a little intense. We're gonna soften those when they're dry, but we can also push some of this pigment away with water. So I'm doing that here. I'm just kind of babysitting the nose and I'm pushing it back towards the dark side of the nose here. And then what I want to try to do is just put water in these white areas so it'll soften the edges, but at the same time kind of push pigment away, if we can achieve that. The pigment looks like it wants to go where I'm putting the water instead of being repelled by it. So we just have to play with it. I'm gonna lift some of it out. There we go. I'm gonna do the same thing, just put some water here. Hopefully we can get some blooming happening. I think that looks so good. This is super wet. So if I touch this edge, let's just show you what's gonna happen. It's gonna come right into this. But it's not coming in as much as I was thinking it would. So that's kind of neat. I actually like that. Putting more water in. Pretty, 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 pretty. Super, super pretty. Okay, I'm gonna put even more ultramarine blue over here, making sure we get this side really nice and dark. And the other thing we wanna think about too is those whiskers as we're babysitting this muzzle. Putting some more black down here. I'm gonna put some black up here. And some of those little whiskery dots. I'm gonna grab some black with my grainer brush and see if we can get some whisker shapes over here too. And his muzzle kind of extends into this shape. So let's go ahead and let that happen. Let's go ahead and come in with some neutral tint. Heavy mix on a nice wet brush so we can lay down a nice pool of color here. This is definitely a shadowy part of his face. I'm scrubbing the paint in my palette. It's dry, so I'm scrubbing it to try to get it released and into my brush. That's looking so fun and yummy. Oh, so pretty. I love to make like the lines too that's happened. So now I'm going to come in with my grainer brush and make that look like that those furry edges were after too. A little bit more water, popping that in there so we have more to work with. There we go. Grainer brush, get those nice fluffy edges. And I'm going to come in more ultramarine blue. See if we can get that looking good. Put some down here and combine that together right there. Looks nice. I still have some neutral tint here, I think, on my grainer brush. There we go. This area is getting dry, so it's showing those grainer brush bristle areas. That looks cool. All right, I'm going to pick up a little bit of this. See if I can before it gets too dry, because we just want this to be a little bit lighter than the dark side. So I put in water and I pick up pigment. It's kind of what I'm doing, because I still want it to dry with a lot of water still in it so that it can blend and do those pretty watercolory things we're looking for. And I'm lifting some water and pigment off the light side here too. And then I'm dropping in more water to push the pigment around, both towards the dark side and towards the edges of this shape. Okay, we don't want to forget about these whiskers that we've been talking about. That's a good one, but sometimes the pigment still kind of comes and fills it in. And I always try to keep in mind how whiskers are like anatomically on their face, how they're kind of small and short towards their lips, and then they kind of get longer as they go back in their snout. It just helps me so it doesn't look confetti, like I'm just putting whiskers anywhere I want to. So they're kind of smaller towards the front. And this is too wet for scraping. Over here it's like perfect. So you can even scrape out some of those tinier hairs that you see on the muzzle that are kind of all over the muzzle. And then they get longer towards the back. He's got a cute one right there too. Got a couple cute ones. Maybe we can pull, there we go, pull some whiskers from this water area. Smaller right here. Then they get a little bit bigger. And you don't need to do every single whisker, because those lines will really attract your viewer's eye. So we just need to kind of hint at them. so that our viewers are gonna be looking at the other beautiful parts of the portrait that we're still painting. So I'm gonna go ahead and paint the ear shape almost to the edge, because we're gonna come in with our grainer brush and give that edge, that furry, fluffy texture with our grainer brush. So I go almost to the edge of that ear shape. And I'm not afraid to put a lot of water down. Now, if you're having trouble when you lay down, because what we're gonna do next is lay down our neutral tint. If you're having trouble with it just spreading everywhere instead of kind of going where you put it, it's most likely the brand of paint you're using. And I've had a lot of frustration with that myself. I tried core paints and those are beautiful, but they sure do love to spread. And that was frustrating for me, being used to a neutral tint that basically kind of goes where I put it, even when I'm laying it into a wet area. So this particular way of painting ears, it's helpful to have a neutral tint or a base color that goes where you put it. Okay, so I'm almost all the way to the edge of those ear shapes. And you can see this is quite the pool of water. And I go really close to the edge. We want to get kind of close to that. Looking nice. All right, nice heavy mix of neutral tint on the same brush that we're using for black. I really want to get a lot of paint mixed and ready for myself here. And I'm trying to keep an eye, babysit the muzzle as it's drying too. Because you could, there we go, look at that scraping we got from waiting a little bit longer. That's really pretty. Okay. All right, what are we doing? We're getting our neutral tint. And I'm just going around the edge. So I'm gonna start over here. It's really dark over here. And actually his ears kind of have this dark outline, which is great for us. And let's see, he's got his face, and then he's got this dark, dark, dark ear shape. And you can see I'm putting this neutral tint in a really saturated with water area, and it's kind of staying. That's what I'm used to, and so that's why I really like painting ears this way, because it's not too unpredictable. Okay, we got this pretty dark shape. I actually didn't paint with water, drawing that into there, so maybe we can still retain a little bit of a highlight right there. We'll see. And then I'm gonna put some right here. Okay. Now, I don't want to put too much ultramarine blue on this ear. Kind of want it to be a little bit watery. I'm going to put it right next to the black and towards the bottom. And then I'm going to come in with that same flat brush and see if I can kind of push it down even. And maybe even pick up and blend it a little bit. I want this to be almost more gray than black, like a really nice watery version. It's pooling like crazy down here. I'm just gonna lift a little bit of that up. Okay. And then we gotta think about our grainer brush too. So I'm gonna just make some of these nice fluffy edges that he's got. He's got kind of short hair. The reference photo, he clearly has wet hair, and we're painting it as if it's dry. So dry hair just is a little bit less clumpy. But I still like to have some of these furry edges show up. And a little bit of, but they're just a little bit more fluffy, not quite so clumpy. I'm gonna come in with water right there on the top edge and let those kind of blend a little bit in a smoother way. And put more water down here. This is a pretty highlight. Maybe we can lift it out a little bit. It's got that pretty highlight right there. And his hair, we should do this as a grainer brush edge too. I'm going to pull some of that wet color up into this little shape with my grainer brush. And let's go over here. I'm just going to smooth out. This water kind of got really pooled over here and it's starting to dry up here. So I'm just going to pull it back, push it back a little bit. And I'm going to keep an eye on, I'm putting a little bit of water here. Maybe this can blend a little bit. Just keeping an eye on our muzzle too at the same time. Okay, let's come in with our neutral tint on the shadow side ear. Right along that edge with that neutral tint. Just get this dark shape painted as well. And grainer brush that in a little bit before it gets too dry. When you paint directly on dry paper, that paint is going to dry a lot faster. So I'm just coming in and doing some grainer brush right before it gets too dry. This highlight is really nice. We'll come in and soften it too after it dries. And I'm grainer brushing these little furry edges down here and on the side of his ear too. Let's do our ultramarine blue. This is going to be a lot of fun because we wanted a lot more on this side of the ear. This ear versus the other ear. I'm going to come in and put a little bit more water on this ear. Try to push that ultramarine blue into the black. I really just want a hint of it on that ear. Obviously, it's not quite a hint on this ear. All right, I'm just dabbing off my grainer brush and seeing if we can get pull some color into that dry paper for a nice furry edge. I like this idea of having this part of it be a little bit more smooth, so I'm just bringing it out completely to the edge of that ear shape. Because the whole thing doesn't need to be furry. Sometimes it's nice to have a little combination, because then you're like reminded, oh, this is a painting. It's not just a photorealistic image. That combination of edges and colors and values and loose and tight, that's where all the magic is. So now I'm just looking at it, making sure it's where I want it to be, and it's quite beautiful. I'm even going to put a little bit more ultramarine down here. more here while this is still wet. All right, this is gonna look so cool. It's just like a magic show, I think, especially once we pop in those copper eyes. I'm gonna drop in a little bit more water, letting it push some of that pigment around, just so this isn't too one-dimensional, even though it's on the dark side. And I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can drop in a little bit of water there too, without it bleeding into that reflection too much. It kind of went crazy. Probably maybe should have waited until this was fully dry, but we can still work with it. Looking really cool. Just lifting some of that pigment out on the reflection. All right, this is still wet here, so I'm just tapping some of that pool out for me. Yours might be completely dry. Okay. Now I want to get to the eye. I'm going to have another round brush handy for my quinacridone gold. That'll be the copper color that we put in the iris. And I'm going to go ahead and paint this eye shape, even going into the, well, I don't want to go into the reflection too much. I kind of already did. Okay. I actually might let that dry because I think I painted where I shouldn't. I kind of want a nice crisp reflection like I'm seeing in the photo. So I'm going to wait till that dries. I'm going to wait till this dries. And we're just kind of babysitting the ears too. Seeing if there's anything else we want to do. Putting a little bit of water in here is pretty. Putting a little bit right here. Maybe we can create some pretty blooms and things happening. We're going to go ahead and paint the shape in the eye that is around that beautiful reflection. So we're painting it with water. I'm not afraid to go into the pupil. That's not a part of the reflection, but I am trying a little bit more carefully this time to avoid the reflection. And then I'm going to come in with my quinacridone gold and just paint the very outside edges and let the paint run into the inside part. That is really pretty. Let's go ahead and we're going to keep an eye on this one. We're not done yet, but I'm going to go ahead and go do the same thing on this side. Staying away from the reflection. There's a little white line on this side too that I kind of want to keep intact. You can kind of see better where I'm putting the water here because it's running into and picking up some of that black. Nice heavy mix of quinacridone gold. Laying that down right along the outside edge. You have to kind of match the wetness of your brush to the wetness of the paper for it to lay down kind of how you want it to. It just takes a little practice. Trying to get that reflection shape really nice there. And dropping in more pigment towards the outside. So I'm kind of going to do that same thing over here, just drop some pigment on the outside edge. And then pick up a little pigment. Actually, what I'm going to do is put that into the pupil where it is, where it goes here. I'm actually kind of scrubbing that black color a little bit and letting it blend into the iris. I like that. I might want to lift a little bit, because sometimes that black travels a little bit farther than we'd like. The other thing with at least the brand of neutral tint that I have, when it mixes with that quinacridone gold, it can give a little bit of a green color. But we can mitigate that by adding in a little opera pink if we need to. I'm going to tap in some more gold on the nice outside edges of the eyes. I said we were going to work one eye at a time, and initially you do, but then you got to keep going, and you have time though. You have time before things dry to work with it. So I'm just tapping in some more color for here. On the outside edge. And what I think I want to try to do is get a little bit of opera pink and put it right in the pupil so that we just mitigate that green happening. I'm lifting a little bit of that neutral tint out too at the same time. Okay, I like where it is. We're gonna lift out a highlight after it's dry. Tapping in some more quinacridone. Make sure we get a nice layer of that, because we are gonna lift some of it out too. And I might just put in a tiny bit more of this the neutral tint to make sure we have a nice size pupil to match where we're seeing it on the reference photo. Putting a little bit up here too. maybe some more of that pink up at the top where we're putting the neutral tint. Just don't want it to get green up there. There we go. I love doing colors. They go by so fast. Tons of fun. So I typically paint like the, usually they have like a metal shape. So I'm just kind of making a little bit of a that metal outline. And I'm going to do a nice watery kind of blend of ultramarine and neutral tint, so it's more gray, and get a nice watery mix of that and just drop it in where we put that water. And you can kind of pull it too and create thinner edges. And that can look really cool. Let's paint I think I'm going to just take my flat brush, nice heavy mix of ultramarine, and keep it really watery so that we have time to work with it before it dries. And go ahead and just paint the shapes that we see in the collar itself without, like, give yourself some space between these shapes, a little thin white edge. And if it blends in certain spots, we actually want that. That can look really cool, but we don't want it to blend everywhere. We want it to maintain a little bit of a shape so that we can distinguish what's going on. So it's a really watery, wet brush so that we're kind of creating these pools of color that we can have more time to work with them. So I'm going to pick up some more, make sure I'm still laying down nice big pools of color here. I think he might be wearing, I don't know, 2 collars or something. But I'm simplifying it a little bit and just making it look like it's a nice 1 collar shape. I think collars can look really good to give it a little bit of that same kind of piece of contrast that we keep talking about between these in focus, sharp edge detail areas, and then the more abstract shapes that we're going to be doing as well. So I want to maintain that it's lighter and darker over here. So and right now it's kind of the opposite. So I'm going to go ahead and put more of that ultramarine over where it should be really dark. On this side, kind of here. And then ooh, that's going to be a pretty splatter. You can't see that, but there it is. Right there. I'm going to leave that there. I've grown to love, I should say, these splatters that just happen as I paint in a kind of more relaxed, messy way. I think they end up looking really cool because I don't think I'd be brave enough to put those in there myself. So by just letting them happen seems to be the best way for me to achieve those. But you have to let go a little bit, be willing to let them happen. So I'm just lifting out some of that pool that we painted with, and it's lifting out the water, but it's also lifting out the pigment that we put in. So lighter over here and then darker over on that side. It's blending into this pretty ring silver ring shape on the collar, and I think that looks really good. Okay, here's where the magic happens in collars, is you paint these shapes, but then you add water to them. And it will push the pigment to the outside edge of those shapes. And I really think that that's why what ends up making collars look really good and like watercolory instead of really tight. And kind of like you just painted them. You're letting watercolor be watercolor, and that's when it looks the best. So we'll babysit this too. I'm gonna even make this part of the collar darker. So I'm just putting in a little bit more pigment on this part and over on this edge. And I'm gonna lift a little bit more from this shape. So lifting it, and then you're also dropping in water, pushing it out. Okay, and we're gonna basically do the exact same thing with that black clasp on the collar. It's a little bit tighter, so I'm gonna go in and do it with my silver black velvet brush, but kind of like a medium mix, not super heavy mix of neutral tint, but nice and wet because we want to make sure we paint with a nice pool of it. And you can see some kind of reflective areas, so you can paint around those too. And again, I'm not too careful or concerned if they touch some of those shapes, because that can make it look watercolory, and well, we want that. We want it to look really watercolory and pretty. It's like a lot of reflective areas in this claspy thing. And then we're just giving ourselves a little bit of space between these shapes, a little bit of a white space. I think that looks really nice. But also allowing them to touch if they do. All right, I think I'm going to paint some of those reflections in a really, really watery mix. Okay, so I'm kind of doing a similar thing now that we've painted the shapes, and lifting some of that water and pigment out. And then dropping some water in. Kind of dropping it in right here too. Looks kind of nice. It seems just a little tight with these reflections, so I might go in and combine some of them too. And then dropping in water so it pushes it away. And we still have this pretty shape over here too that we gotta paint. And this shape will be a little bit darker. And I love how it blended in with that ultramarine. I'm gonna make sure we have enough ultramarine over there. Putting in a little bit more right there. And maybe dropping in some right here too. He has like a little bit of another collar-y thing. I think that's like a secondary collar, so I don't think that's adding to the portrait. So I'm not gonna paint that shape up here. We're just gonna leave that alone. So that's it for the collar. We can still babysit that too as it dries. Make sure it's doing what we want it to do. I'm gonna plop in a tiny bit more water. Oh, well, just plopped it in for myself. Just did it on its own. Let's go back up to the eyes. Okay. What I'd like to do is try our hand at lifting a little bit of this quinacridone gold out right in the center of the iris and seeing if we can get a really pretty highlight happening. So this is dry now, and it should allow us to lift it out. So I'm just coming in with my wet brush that I blot and just basically rubbing some of that pigment off right in the center. And then as it gets on my brush, I just dip it in water, blot it off to clean it. And then I'm gonna see if I can put some water in there to push any pigment that got picked up again to the outside of the edge. We'll do that on both eyes. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and come in with the water and put it right where we lifted, and then it will hopefully push whatever pigment we lifted up to the outside of that lifted shape. And that's another layer on the eyes. I think the next step was going to be just refining that nose area a little bit. So I'm going to come in with my wet brush. I'm just blotting it a little bit. And what I'm going to try to do is just soften some of these edges and shapes so it's just a little bit more cohesive. So I'm kind of rubbing the edge and allowing the pigment to move in. And making it a little bit more softer. And like it's one nice big pretty shape here. So I'm really just scrubbing that hard edge that we have on the neutral tint and blending it, softening it into that pretty reflection on the nose. And I'm lifting around the nose shape too. Just creating highlights where I think it would help make sense of the shapes in the muzzle that we can see. And you can really see how just a little bit of that softening and refining the shapes that we can see helped so much. Just looks really good. Let's go back to the eyes. Let's try to get those in a good place. We're gonna go ahead and do the reflection that we see in the eye. What I'm going to start by is just, oh gosh, we have a lot of wet paint everywhere. So this is a little, you have to be precise without getting into these other areas we painted. So I'm going to have my blotted wet brush here and just try to slightly soften around the reflection, but it's in general a pretty hard edge. So I don't really want to, I just kind of want to smooth out some of those bits of paint that maybe caught the paper and look a little rough where they should be nice and smooth. Scrubbing out a little bit of this. That's going to be pretty black, so I'm not going to worry about that. Do a similar thing here. This kind of creates a little halo that looks nice. Okay, the other thing I want to do now is put a little line of ultramarine blue right along that black edge, and that's what we're going to pull into the reflection. But I don't want it around the quinacridone gold edge because then it'll turn green. So we're going to put it right along the edges of the pupil that we have. And then we can take our wet brush and pull it into the darker areas of the reflection. And just create some shapes with that. And I'm gonna maybe even drop in a little bit more ultramarine. And drop in some water, see if it pushes it. And I think it will, to the edges. So let's do a similar thing over here. Grab some of that blue and bring it into the darker area of that reflection. and then drop in some water. So hopefully it just pushes it out. And I'm gonna even kind of come into this area that we kept white and see if we can make it a little bit softer. A little bit more blue up here. And some more water. There we go. And the other thing I think would look nice is maybe a little bit of purple along the gold edge. So let's mix that up. You can see that I have a purple well right here. So my purple is just opera pink and ultramarine blue. We want to make sure it's purple and not blue because of the green. We don't want it to get green. So I'm creating a nice pink purple here. That looks good. And I'm going to try to achieve a really thin, zoom in here on the eyes. A nice thin layer of that purple right along the top. Even going into the iris instead of the reflection more so. And I even went kind of towards the outside shape of the eye too. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Kind of going along the outside edge of the iris too, and then all the way up to that top edge of the reflection. And then we can go ahead and soften that in. It's very wet, so we gotta be a little bit careful how we blend it right now. Blending it up here and into the iris a little bit too. And this is really quite dark. I'm gonna go ahead and blend that around into it. Kind of pulling that purple around into this white area. Pulling that, I think I'm gonna pull it into this area a little bit too. How fun is that? I think the magic happens when you make sure you keep this wet, but I'm not gonna put in any more water. I do like what happened in those reflections a lot. Let's do the dark side, which is typically what I like to do at this point in the painting, where we have the muzzle basically done, the eyes are basically done, we've done the ears. So I always paint my dark side first, because that way I don't overpaint the light side and then there's just nothing I can do and both sides are just painted equally. So I'm gonna lay down water, where the darkest darks I can see are in the reference photo. A nice heavy layer of water. The more water we have, the more time we have. We don't need it to go like pool like crazy, but it'll be good to give ourselves more time. And this reference photo is just a really nice reference photo because you can clearly see those reflected areas of fur. So you know like where the lightest lights are and the darkest darks are. And let's put down a nice heavy mix of neutral tint. Again, where we see those darkest darks. We don't have to go everywhere we painted water because we can let the neutral tint blend into those areas on its own. Let's get our ultramarine ready too. A nice heavy mix of ultramarine, and go in next to kind of outlining some of that area where we painted with black. And now we're going to refine the edges. So what I want to do, let's have our grainer brush handy. And I'm also going to pull some of this color into more of the mid-tone areas that I can see. Just by painting with water and touching the areas we already painted with the color as well. I'm lifting up, really pooled right here, so I'm just lifting some of that up. And I want to get my grainer brush handy. I'm going to load it with some of that black color and just bring it out, pulling some of that furry edge out as we see it. Can be out. Okay, and that's mostly just right there. Although I think what we could do is bring this a little bit down, a little bit more into this area. It would look nice. And so now we're just kind of manipulating it as it dries, lifting, adding water, softening the edges, pulling it into other areas of the painting. Just get to see what you might want to do to make it look good before it dries. I'm kind of lifting this shape right around the muzzle to make sure I'm distinguishing that a little bit from the rest of his face. And then not being afraid to saturate the ultramarine on this side of the face. And now I'm kind of even taking these techniques into the lighter side of the painting. I'm gonna lift a little bit of this out. It just ended up being a little harsh for me, that I kind of want to have this be a more drier texture. So I'm gonna come in and layer that later. And then lifting out this ear shape a little bit. Got a little bit muddled into the ear. And I want to make sure that that's obvious, that that's where his ear is. And adding water, because we love how that water behaves. We want watercolor to be watercolor. So I'm just putting water where I want that to happen. Still have some neutral tint on my brush here. So putting it where I think it might benefit from some neutral tint and furry texture. Come back here and do that with a dry brush, I think, on that part. I think now would be a good time to finish this little area, and what I'm going to do for that is just do a kind of a thinner layer of water. And see if I can just get some nice definition in some of these areas. And then focusing this ultramarine on the dark side of the face too. And I'm going to let it bleed in there. I like that right now a lot. I'm going to try not to disturb it too much. I like how this neutral tint is kind of separating, so I might even emphasize that a little bit by even laying down a little bit more pigment in those areas where it's separating. And just making sure I also define the features, making it clear that this is the bottom part of the lip. I'm going to lift off right here, and you can do this too when it's dry. To give myself a little bit more definition between the lip and his neck. I just really love how this separated, so I'm just again coming back in, putting a little bit more pigment in those separations. It's separated up here too, between those two lifted areas, those two lighter areas. Oh, that's why I love neutral tint, especially American Journey neutral tint. I'm sure, I'm not sure, but I know other brands I'm thinking would do similar things as this brand does. Let's see, we have that dark shape coming up and the lighter shape. So I want to maintain that nice light shape too. I love this blooming that's happening and things like that. So sometimes if it doesn't disrupt where the features are too much, I will let it do that. So obviously this is not in the reference photo, right? But we really like what's happening. So I'm going to let it, for now, I might come in and refine it later. But for now, I really like what I'm seeing. So I'm going to leave it alone. I love this. So try to leave that alone too. And then we're going to come in. This is like 95% dry. Come in with some of my grainer brush details for some of his fur down here. That's nice and dark. His fur is a little longer around his neck, so maybe I'm just going to lengthen some of these brush strokes. You can even use that residual paint you have on your grainer brush to also do some dry brush details on the muzzle too. Because those top dry layers can add a lot of texture and make that muzzle really pop. That's looking so fun. We'll definitely need to refine around the eye and give it some more depth. But you can see just how painting this dark side, it feels like we could almost be done, right? And so that's where I've learned that I have to paint the dark side first so I don't paint the light side too much. We want to just not go too crazy on the light side. Let's finish the eyes with a few more layers of detail. I'm going to start by just lifting a little bit inside the reflection. I like the little edges that it created, but I want to see if maybe I can just get a little bit more out of there. I didn't do too much with that, but that's fine. Sometimes you just gotta try things. I'm just coming in now with a nice heavy mix of quinacridone and seeing if I can get it a little bit deeper of a gold color. So kind of putting it towards the outside edges. I'm gonna actually maybe do some azo yellow. Let's see what that would look like. I like that a lot. That looks really nice. It just made it pop quite a bit compared to the other one. So gonna come in and do the same thing. Some quinacridone gold on the outside. And then pop in a little azo yellow. And let those kind of mix together as they want to while it dries. And then I'm going to go ahead and just refine the details, the black details around the eye, and make sure it's just accurate and looking really sharp and nice. Try to get like a heavy mix of color on a drier brush so that it creates some nice defined lines here for this part of the eye. And then just softening that nice highlight between those two darker shapes in the eye. I'm gonna maybe even pop in a little bit of ultramarine. Sometimes that a little bit of color right around that eye can look really cool. And just making sure I have enough layers of that gold in there to give it the depth that it deserves and that rich color we're looking for. So I'm going to do a similar thing with the light side and paint with water where I see the darkest darks. And then we'll come in with our highlight color and our neutral tint. And we can go ahead and pull color too as we see a need to while we're painting. So I'm going to come in with my flat brush still, because in general I like it to have more visible brush strokes when we're really minimally painting like we are in this case. And thinking about and kind of looking at this, it's really blue. It's like, and I'm wondering if it's too, if it has enough ultramarine in it, and I'm thinking it kind of does. So I'm just gonna pivot a little bit and maybe put some cobalt as the highlight color. Yeah, let's just go for it. We're gonna go with cobalt. So I'm gonna have a nice kind of watery mix of cobalt here and put that on, well, basically next to the darkest dark areas that we just laid down, and anything that's not a direct highlight. And then I just like to, when I kind of do these visible brush strokes too, I like to have another brush ready if I need to soften an edge. And sometimes, and most of the time really, I kind of just soften one of the edges. So I'm just putting it kind of next to the darkest darks and also where I'm seeing some more midtones. it kind of creates a pretty color mixed with that neutral tint too. Kind of neat. I just think sometimes these visible brush strokes can be so pretty. And I want to have my grainer brush handy. Put a little watery mix of neutral tint on there. Sometimes that can look nice if you give it some of these fluffy details where it might need a little bit of fluff. Yeah, I do think that this cobalt was a good idea. So I'm gonna glaze some too. I'm gonna make sure you can see that. There we go. I'm gonna go ahead glaze a little bit on the ear itself, that highlight ear. I don't want to cover up some of those beautiful moments that happened with the neutral tint over there. It's just so beautiful what's happening. So I want to just do one quick layer and then get out of there. And I want to, since we are glazing with this color now, I'm going to glaze it in some other highlight areas that make sense. And I'm also kind of considering the shape of the features too as I'm laying down this color. I know a lot of times it's hard to be like, how are you deciding where you're putting that color? And I'm looking at what might help enhance the shape so we understand the features that we're seeing on the dog. And I'm also just putting it kind of next to the darkest darks to ease the darks into the highlights as kind of a mid-tone color. And then I'm also going to want some on his muzzle as part of his highlights. That looks so cool when you do it like dry brushy like that. I like how that looks like right there. It's funky for me. It's always a challenge to deal with the opacity piece of cobalt. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing because it also has advantages to having that opacity to it. Okay, let's extend those highlight colors and shadow colors into the body. And with the body, I love to make an abstract. This is where the concept of contrast comes in a nice abstract way. So I'm going to lay down some water. Not as much on the highlight side, kind of focusing more on the shadow side. And I'm going to leave some of the areas not painted. Okay, that's all I kind of want to do because I want to be able to come in and do some of the, well, you'll see. We'll find out. Let's just see what happens. So starting with my highlight color, putting some over here. And then I'm gonna go ahead and grab the neutral tint, I think, with my grainer brush. So I'm gonna get a nice heavy mix of that on here. I don't know, I think a nice smooth edge right there kind of looks neat. I'm going to grab a little bit of ultramarine too and let that blend into the paint. And then I always like to kind of anchor And now, okay, I think what I'm gonna do, what would look really good with this particular painting is, I'm just, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing everything all at once, everywhere all at once. Okay, I have to move things around here and work a little bit faster. I want this bottom to drip, and we definitely have plenty of water to make that happen. Ooh, pretty. Ooh, so pretty. Let's see if I can anchor this a little bit while I work. So you can kind of keep things as they are or manipulate them. And then just as you see it, manipulate things as you go. Sometimes making some edges that naturally happened kind of furry is nice. I like what's happening over here. I'm gonna dry this off and see if maybe I can get some more fluffier edges just with my flat brush. And I can. I'm gonna bring that a little bit in. And I'm gonna even drop in a little water. Maybe that can do some watercolory things right there. And this is a little too sharp, so I'm just gonna let those blend together. And I know it's kind of funny because it's like, well, that's the collar and this is the fur, but I think it'll look better if we let them mingle and make that area a little bit more abstract. And let's see, we're running out. Okay, I'm gonna put some of my highlight color right there. I like that idea. Grab some shadow color, put it up here. Oops. I didn't really intend for it to go completely up that far. Adding some water too. And it's blooming because it was almost dry. It's always a lot of fun to see what happens at different stages of dampness. The granulation, I think that might be my favorite part. I really like that. It's so pretty. Okay, we just want to think about values for a hot second here before we are done. And isn't that fun? It's like so fast to paint the bodies of our animals that we're working on. So I have this neutral tint again on my grainer brush. Actually, I'm not really crazy about how the grainer brush is laying down the color. I often really like what the flat brush does though. So let's see if we can get this value a little bit more aligned with what we're doing here. The other thing I'm kind of liking is this splatter right here. It's just really pretty. All right, so now I'm just kind of having too much fun. It's so pretty, isn't it? Isn't that pretty? Oh my gosh. You guys, watercolor, right? You put in so much time and effort into the details of making sure the muzzle and the eyes and everything is right, and then you get to this point where you can just let it go, have a lot of fun, do these abstract body parts, and then I could just watch it dry, which is funny, but I could just watch it dry and be in awe of the granulation and the pushing of the pigment, and gosh, it's fun. I love lifting and then adding color. Adding water. So it pushes the pigment to the edges. I think that will look especially good here, mostly because otherwise this is like really dark, and so your eye is kind of going to this. All right, we're really close now. I think what I'm just gonna do is get to a place where I'm really happy with the detail. And that's typically all we have to do. I don't like that. We don't need that. That's too much. And that's why you need Kleenex. So you can get those before they stick. So now it's just details. So grainer brush details, details around the eyes and muzzle, whatever you think your painting needs to get to that really nice finished look without being too done. But if I always know, like, if it looks a little funky or disproportionate, or maybe the values are off, then you don't have to be really worried about overworking it if that's something that's needs adjusting. But once that's in place and you've made your suggested details, and you don't need to fill in all the details at that point. This is really a nice highlight, and I want to kind of distinguish that from this part of his body, so I'm gonna just fill in. Yeah, that looks nice. To make sure this stays white, I'm gonna go ahead and maybe even put a touch of ultramarine right there too. The other thing that can be fun to do is lift in the muzzle. We were making on these dogs that have more whiskery muzzles too, little lifted areas can give it a lot of dimension. But you don't need a lot of those, otherwise it'll look a little funny. And then lifting dots in their noses too can bring a lot of texture back into it. So I know my hand is kind of covering it up, but I'm just trying to get some detail back into the eye with another layer of black here. And I've been putting a little detail too back in the pupil to make it sure it's the right value of nice and dark, where it needs to be nice and dark. And then I'm just kind of getting those values right and softening the edges a little bit here too. Really watery mix of neutral tint now is kind of on my brush, just so I can get some of this furry detail around the eye. Having some detail around the eye makes a lot of sense because your eye will go there and look at that, and we want that to happen. So now I'm back to a kind of a heavier mix, and I just want to make sure I really got the darkest darks right and the sharp lines where there should be sharp lines. And it's just so fun to see how like a little layer, really dark layer in the areas that are super dark can make such a big difference in the colors and the shapes just popping off and looking. Okay, before I forget, I kind of want to get a little highlight of buff titanium. So I'm getting a nice heavy mix on my size 2 brush and scraping it off so I don't have a wet brush, but I have it nice and loaded with buff titanium. I want to see if I can get a nice line of this on the eye here. Because I didn't leave this as a highlight. And I think it needs it. And a little bit of buff titanium up here too. That just can really help it pop. Just pop it, pop it. How good does that look? Just a little touch of buff titanium. Make it look so nice. We have a nice line right here. I can kind of refine that even a little bit if I want to. I'm really loving the eyes. I think, and I'm always just thinking, I want to make sure the nose looks really nice. So sometimes I like blur my eyes just to try and make sure I get, it kind of reduces the detail and I can really see the values a little bit better if I give myself a shot at doing that. So just gonna come in and make sure I got the shape of the nose looking like how I want it to be. And you can even do the same thing with buff titanium to maybe recover some highlights if you lost some of them. Although I would say for this particular painting, since we're actually kind of wanting that cooler white, Chinese white or titanium white would work probably better. And then I don't have those, so I'm going to come in with my bleed proof white and get back some of those highlights. I like to just take whatever's in the cap and rehydrate it with some water. And let's just see if we can get some of these highlights looking good back a little bit. Getting some of those dots on the nose could be really beautiful too. You can do that with the white. It's fun to have a brush to soften it too if you need to. And this is a nice way to get some of those highlights. A little bit more abstract shapes. I just don't want them to be too intense. So softening those in, doing little lighter versions of them too. And maybe what I will do is do a nice watery bleed proof white if I can get that. I can kind of, it's hard to get it too watery. There we go. And maybe even a little bit of highlight down here. He's got this cute little lip that's showing. So I like those little reflections. And then we can even take this and give him the whiskers that we haven't been able to do that yet. And the thing I try to avoid is thick whiskers or whiskers that are just kind of too intense, too bright. And then too many whiskers. So we wanted to just enhance what we're painting and make it look even better. Are we done? Gosh, I love it so much. You know, this is the point where I typically say, yeah, we are done. But we can come back and usually when I allow myself to do that, it'll prevent me from overworking the painting, and I can come back and see what it needs. And sometimes I'm like, you know what, I need to glaze it a little bit. Maybe I need to darken a detail or lift. I still have to sign it. Maybe I want to add some splatter, but I don't want to do too much. The other thing is it's very blue, so I'm hoping that the client of this commission likes that. But if it's too blue, we can go in and glaze it with some neutral tint. But I do think it's really pretty like this. So this is kind of the full painting, and you can really see it better when it's like this, as how it looks once it's on the paper. I'm gonna go ahead and sign it. Think about where I want to. I think over here could look really cool. Down here, up here might look good. The other thing you can do with this pen is do black hair details, which can be really fun. You can put in a couple darker whiskers, which, you know, definitely makes sense for this particular dog. And I just love this pen for that too, because you can also manipulate it while it's still wet before it dries. That one had some quinacridone on it. I just imagine where I think it would look good in the grand scheme of things. And I think over here, that's kind of where I'm feeling it. And I try not to sign it too big. I just kind of want it on there, but not huge. And I want it to make it better. Like the signature completes it. I think the signature actually looks really good and makes it look like art at a certain point. So this is when I would take a step back. I would allow myself some time to think about, just to step away so I don't overwork it, come back to it with fresh eyes, and oftentimes I'll see, oh, I should probably maybe add a little glaze of color right there, maybe lift right there, maybe add another layer of color to darken it right there. But that's it. We're done. Thank you so much for painting with me. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you embrace the wateriness of watercolor, and I hope you try maybe American Journey neutral tint, because it happens to be just the best thing ever and how it behaves with water. Happy painting. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you in the next video.